Good afternoon. My name is Terry Camacho Gonzalez, and I am a Hispanic woman with a Blur background in the back. I work for the Traumatic Brain Injury Technical Assistance and Resource Center. Thank you for joining us today for our Brain Injury and Child Welfare Best Practice, a Guide and Tools for State Agency webinar. Next slide. During today's webinar, I'll be joined by my colleagues, Maria Crawley and Judy Debner, who will be assisting with the question and answer portion of this webinar, and also Judy will introduce the speakers. But first, we want to do some logistics. Next slide. Participants will be in listen-only mode during the webinar. Please use the chat feature in Zoom to post questions and communicate with the host. We will respond to the specific questions at the end of this webinar that have been entered into the chat. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat, and then at the end, once all the presenters have spoken, we will go to the questions. This webinar is being live captioned in English and live interpreted in Spanish. The live English captions can be accessed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Live Spanish interpretation can be accessed by clicking the interpretation button also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's the world icon. Once you are in the Spanish channel, please silence the original audio. If not, you're going to hear the English and Spanish. Se puede acceder a la interpretación en español en vivo haciendo el clic en el botón Interpretation en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, el icono del mundo. Una vez en el canal español, por favor, silencie el audio original. This live webinar includes polls and evaluation questions, so please be prepared to interact during those polling times. Next slide. Feedback and follow-up. After the webinar, you can send follow-up questions and feedback to us at tbitarc@hsri.org. Please note that this email address will not be monitored during the webinar. A recording, including a PDF version of the slides, will be available on the ACL website, acl.gov. The slides are also available now to be downloaded for those that are interested, and we'll share the link in a few seconds. Next slide. Before we start this webinar, we want to have a sense of who's here. In what roles do you self-identify? So here we have some roles that you might fall into, and please choose as many as you fall into. You're not limited to just one. The first one is a person with a traumatic brain injury or other disability. Second is if you're a family member or a friend of a person with a TBI or other disability. Third, if you identify as a self-advocate or an advocate. Fourth, peer specialist, peer mentor. Another category is whether you identify as a social worker, counselor, or some other kind of care manager. 6 is a researcher analyst, and then you have to hit the sidebar down to see the other categories, but there's a service provider, organization employee, and then the final one is whether you're a government employee, whether at the federal, state, tribal, or municipal level. We will wait until we have about, and we're almost there, 80% of participants responding. Thank you for everyone that is saying hello and telling us where you're from. We are so excited that so many people were able to join us today. And it's great seeing the different types of people that we have here. It looks like we have a good representation. Right now, we can just see that about 48% are direct care staff, like social worker, counselors, or care manager. We have 18% self-advocate or advocate. 39% are government employees, whether the federal, tribal, 25 service provider. We have 14% people with a traumatic brain injury or other disability, and we also have 18% family members, self-advocate and advocate. So really great representation of different types of individuals. So thank you. Just showing the results. We'll stop sharing them. And now I'd like to, next slide, introduce my colleague, Judy, who will introduce herself and then also introduce us to the speakers. We are very Grateful for all of you for joining us, and thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Terry. I just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. And my name is Judy Detmer. I work with the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. I also support the Traumatic Brain Injury Technical Assistance and Resource Center. And today I have the honor of introducing our panel and the topic of what we'll be talking about. This webinar today is a culmination of really a couple of years of great work by the Child Welfare Committee of our work group, excuse me, of the Administration for Community Living Grantees. I'm sure they'll talk a little bit more about their origin, but I think that this resource that you will learn about today is going to be such a good resource for the field, especially as it relates to child welfare. And I learned a lot just by working through this process with them. So without further ado, our panelists today include Jim Pender from Iowa, Kelly Miller from Colorado, June Klein-Bacon from Iowa, Drew Nagel from Pennsylvania, and Wendy Elmo from Tennessee. I did forget to describe myself. I am a white woman with short hair. I wear glasses, and I'm in a cheerful yellow room today. So without further ado, one other thing, their complete bios are available to you, but we wanted to save time by just quickly introducing. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Jim.
Well, hello, everyone. As Judy mentioned, my name is Jim Pender, and I am the grant manager for the Administration for Community Living Traumatic Brain Injury State Partnership Program in Iowa. I'm located in Des Moines, and I've served in this role since February of 2019. On behalf of our other presenters, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I am a middle-aged white male with balding hair, or probably more truthfully, not any hair, and a salt and pepper beard, and if I'm being honest, it's mostly salt. My pronouns are he and him. Today, I'm wearing an orange button-down shirt with light green checks, and my background is a blank white wall. And our agenda for today is, next slide. We're going to provide you with some background information which explains the origin of the Ad Hoc Committee on Brain Injury and Child Welfare, which subsequently led us to develop the Brain Injury and Child Welfare Best Practice Guide, information and tools for state agencies. We will highlight some of the major content in the Best Practice Guide, which includes why it is important for child welfare personnel to be aware of the prevalence of brain injury among caretakers and children too, of course, involved in the child welfare system. And we'll leave you with some key takeaways, including steps you can take to make the child welfare system in your state brain injury informed. Next slide, please. So you may ask, why is it important for child welfare personnel to be aware of the prevalence of brain injury among caretakers involved in the child welfare system? And just to explain, a caretaker is the person or persons deemed responsible for a child's abuse. At least that is how it's defined in the state of Iowa. It's important because the issues often addressed in the child welfare cases are related to substance use, mental health, and intimate partner violence concerns. And we know brain injury is found with greater prevalence among individuals who have lived experience with one or more of those concerns. Most important, though, is the fact that child welfare personnel generally are not aware of this fact. And because of that, the system really is not set up to provide the accommodations or compensatory strategies that we believe will improve compliance with the child welfare system's requirements. It begs the question, how many of the 71,335 terminations of parental rights noted in this slide could have been prevented if child welfare personnel and other stakeholders had been brain injury informed. Next slide, please. After a brain injury, parenting may be impacted in such a way that can lead to court involvement and ultimately a loss of parental rights for many reasons. Among them, though, are the ones mentioned in the previous slide. The caretaker may have issues with substances, mental health, or be a survivor of intimate partner violence, as I mentioned. But that makes it challenging to understand or remember requirements of the child welfare system. They may forget court dates, lose track of time, arrive late to meetings, or forget assignments given to them, like seeing a therapist or dropping what we call a UA, urinary analysis. Unfortunately, when that happens, the system interprets this as non-compliance, which I just mentioned can have a devastating impact all the way up to and including the loss of parental rights. Next slide, please. While the primary focus of this guide is for child welfare professionals to become brain injury informed and provides information and resources for states to develop brain injury informed programming, the ad hoc work group didn't lose sight of the fact children who are victims of child abuse may also have had one or more brain injuries. The guide does contain a lot of great resources to support children and youth. Next slide, please. So removing a child from the home has a devastating impact on both the caretaker and the child. Take just a few moments to look at the myriad of emotions that you see in this slide. Imagine, if you will, a system of care that isn't aware of reunification may be predicated on its ability to be brain injury aware and knowing that the caretaker has had a brain injury. Next slide, please. We know separating a child from their parents has detrimental long-term emotional and psychological consequences that might be worse than leaving the child at home. And we certainly know that the best option when we can is to keep families together. Sometimes it's not possible, but that is certainly our desire and goal. And not to mention the financial costs are significant. Next slide, please. This guide, we believe, will be a great way for you to raise awareness of this intersection with your state child welfare agency and others, such as court-appointed special advocates, the judicial system, peer partners, and direct support professionals. But most important, it will offer them solutions to ensure the best outcome possible. Next slide, please. So as Judy mentioned, just a quick slide to give you some context as to how this all began. In the summer of 2019, a children's advocate suggested to us we should screen adults involved in the child welfare system for brain injury. Having worked in the child welfare system earlier in my career and knowing the issues that are usually present, and now knowing what I know about brain injuries and multi-occurring conditions, it made sense. So in 2020, using the subject matter expertise of the Technical Assistance Resource Center, we asked them to conduct a literature review to see if there is research regarding this intersection and find out if any of the other 27 ACL grantees were working in this space. What we found is that Tennessee was training foster parents on brain injury, but the focus was on the children in the system. However, several states expressed an interest to address this intersection. Next slide, please. So it was about this time that NASHA introduced the inaugural Leading Practice Academy addressing criminal and juvenile justice. Because too many youth in foster care age out of the child welfare system, excuse me, and end up in the criminal justice system, we wanted to explore this intersection with our partners in Iowa, and NASHA agreed. In the current ACL grant cycle, Iowa is partnering with their child welfare system, piloting a project to provide neural resource facilitation, support to our child welfare system partners to help them address the unique challenges a brain injury brings when caretakers are trying to meet the requirements of the child welfare system. But that's another webinar. Next slide. As I mentioned, several states were interested to explore this with us. As a result, the TARC facilitated several calls with states that were interested. There was universal agreement this was worth exploring. And in the 2021-2026 grant cycle, ACL and NASHA recognized brain injury and child welfare as an ad hoc work group. Wendy Elmo from Tennessee and I agreed to be the co-chairs of this newly formed work group. Next slide, please. While there have been several states involved throughout, Tennessee, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Connecticut, and Missouri have been the most active. Initially, the work group divided into 3 subcommittees noted in the slide. The primary focus over the past many months has been the development of the guide for state agencies and what we are here today to discuss. Next slide, please. The group quickly decided it made it a lot of sense to model our guide after the already existing criminal and juvenile justice best practice guide written by Judy Detmer. With Judy's permission, we modeled our guide off of hers, borrowing overall layout and some specific wording where it made sense. This was to keep uniformity across this guide and any other guides that may be developed in the future. So readers would have a sense of familiarity and ease of use for using the guide. So with that, I will turn it over to Kelly Miller from Colorado, who will provide us with a quick overview of the child welfare system.
Hello, I'm Kelly Miller with MindSource in Colorado. MindSource is Colorado's lead state agency on brain injury. I am a white woman wearing glasses with long brown hair, and I have a blue background behind me, which has the MindSource logo on it. Next slide. So many of you know the child welfare system is very complex. Each state is tasked with determining its own definition of child maltreatment and developing their own policies and procedures. However, the Children's Bureau within the United States Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families holds the primary responsibility for ensuring federal child and family legislation is put into place. So long story short, there are some federal laws which do provide some level of consistency in practice across states. Services are designed to promote the well-being of children by addressing safety, permanency, and the well-being of families and strengthening families. Next slide. The child welfare system, most agencies cannot be all things to all people, so they frequently contract with community-based organizations to provide services. Ideally, many of these services are in place with families as a result of some joint planning and discussion and assessment around identifying needs and strengths of families. So some of these things we have listed here include parenting classes, parenting skills, intimate partner-related services, employment assistance, and housing. Next slide. So how does a family become involved with the child welfare system? Well, it's basically one of 2 ways. Either they reach out on their own to request help and support, or someone makes a report of allegations of abuse or neglect by a parent or a primary caregiver. An important distinction just to bear in mind is that reports or allegations of child maltreatment by a stranger or an acquaintance are typically investigated by law enforcement. So something like a stranger abduction or a child being abused in a child care setting is going to fall into the jurisdiction of law enforcement rather than the child welfare agency. And that is not to say that sometimes law enforcement and child welfare workers don't coordinate on investigations, because that absolutely does happen depending on the severity of the report. Next slide. So there are, many nuances to the child welfare system, and this slide is just sort of a nutshell version of typical actions and things that child welfare agencies do. So initially, they are accepting reports and screening them to determine if there needs to be any further action or investigation. If there is, there's follow-up and investigation that happens. They support families in a multitude of ways. And of course, as Jim mentioned, sometimes reports do result in the removal of a child from a home. Then the goal is hopefully to achieve family reunification. And if that isn't possible, to find another safe, permanent option for the child, such as adoption or guardianship. And now I will turn it over to June, who is going to be talking about different points of entry for brain injury informed work in child welfare.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for taking some time to give us an overview of the child welfare system, recognizing that each state has a potentially different look. So we're excited in this next section of the presentation to give you an opportunity to take a look at the child welfare engagement model. For those of you that might be familiar with the SAMHSA Gaines Center Intercept model, which inspired the child welfare engagement model concept. You're going to see here that this gives you an opportunity to see components and the players within the child welfare system in a way to think about how they're interconnected and how to begin to think about entry points that your state's brain injury services program and the child welfare system may engage with each other. To think about things like brain injury screening, training, case consultation, technical assistance, or referrals to resource facilitation if your state has that program. This guide does give us an opportunity to zoom into the components of the engagement model. As you can see, the top of the model provides you with various pathways that might exist or occur when a family becomes involved with the child welfare system, providing a variety of exit points as well, depending on the path of engagement. Next slide, please. Given the unique components of the child welfare system in each state, the middle section of the model provides a narrative, and I apologize, I believe we're on the next slide. The middle section here provides a narrative to lead brain injury programs to begin thinking about entry points and their prospective roles, to begin to gain an understanding of what those roles might be within those individual entry points. Next slide. The bottom of the model then provides us with a variety of engagement points and different partners for you to consider as you investigate champions within your own state that have the ears to hear the importance of considering the intersection of brain injury along with those that they're already serving. We've mentioned, Jim already mentioned, there are a variety of risk factors that include experiences such as substance use disorders, criminal or juvenile justice involvement, intimate partner violence, among others, to consider these high-risk populations and people with lived experience in these different circumstances. And so the bottom, like I said, of this engagement model gives you an opportunity to think about where you might have partners, where you might have ability to find champions and engage with that system. Next slide. And now I'm excited to invite Drew to address the components of brain injury screening and identification approaches.
Thank you, June. Thanks for explaining to us the child welfare engagement model and where we might consider intervening when it comes to brain injury. You could take us to the next slide. So I'm Drew Nagel, and I am a white male with lots of gray hairs, and I'm wearing a blue checkered shirt today with blue glasses. And I'm sitting in front of a background of white, basically. With what you see there is the tip of my wood stove pipe piping out the warm room here. So I work in 3 federal grants that have to do with screening for brain injury in overrepresented populations where brain injury is more prevalent than it is in the general population. So I work in schools, prisons, and in juvenile justice. And the whole purpose of doing this screening is getting the brain injury identified and getting those folks to brain injury services that could help them. Here we want to share with you some of the components of brain injury screening. When we talk about screening for brain injury in children and adults within the child welfare system, we're talking about taking a critical step to create successful outcomes for the whole system. So identifying the brain injury as soon as possible allows for more specific neurorehab interventions and can allow for lifelong monitoring to reduce or prevent undue stress and struggle, as well as to prevent downstream consequences that are common following brain injury. Because brain injuries frequently go undiagnosed, especially mild brain injury, it's reasonable to expect that there's both children and parents or caregivers in the child welfare system who have experienced 1 or more brain injuries in their lifetime. So we have screening, we're recommending screening everyone involved to be able to identify their lifetime history of brain injury in order to provide comprehensive brain injury supports and services to those who are identified. So there are many validated and reliable screening tools available for doing this. The most recent, the most used and researched tool is the Ohio State University Traumatic Brain Injury Identification Method, also known as the OSU TBI ID. That tool was originally designed to discover any lifetime history of traumatic brain injury, but because the prevalence of other non-traumatic causes of acquired brain injury, such as stroke or anoxia from unintentional opioid overdose, or brain tumor, or other non-traumatic causes, a number of researchers have added an additional set of questions to this inquiry. So the OSU TBI ID is offered as an example of a screen that asks about events that could have caused either a traumatic or a non-traumatic brain injury. And the tool can be found in the Brain Injury and Child Welfare Best Practice Supporting Materials. Some other tools that you see on the screen here and are referenced in the guide as well include the HELPS, the Brain Check Survey, Safe Child Screening Tool for birth to 3, and another for ages 5 to 21, and another tool called the Brain Injury Screening Questionnaire. Next slide, please. So if screening confirms that there was a lifetime event that could have resulted in a brain injury, then there's an opportunity to present an additional questionnaire that elicits whether the person is experiencing symptoms that people with brain injury often have, and if so, how frequently they experience them. So one tool that we have in the guide is called the Adult Symptom Questionnaire, and there's another one like it called the Juvenile Symptom Questionnaire, and these were developed by our colleagues at MindSource in Colorado. And also there's an accompanying set of simple accommodations, like strategies that can be recommended to address some of the symptoms that brain injury survivors may experience. Things like problems with memory, concentration, delayed processing, and other challenges frequently experienced in brain injury. So these accommodations can improve the person's ability to effectively engage in the child welfare process. And so that's why we do the screening, is to implement things like these accommodations. The adult symptom questionnaire and the juvenile symptom questionnaire are all available in the brain injury and child welfare best practice supporting materials. Next slide, please. Many states already have extensive intake forms, which they have in place. Sometimes there's computerized systems, so sometimes they're reluctant to add another screening tool until they may fully see the benefit of it. So as an interim step, before an agency adopts a more formal screening tool, it may be helpful for them to make slight modifications to their existing intake tools. And so one thing they could try is putting a symbol, such as an asterisk, next to any item that indicates a brain injury could have occurred. And some examples of those items in a regular intake might be physical assault or abuse, domestic violence, anoxia from overdose, exposure to toxins, having had a stroke, prior infections of the brain, or a frank traumatic brain injury. And we recommend putting a double asterisk next to all items that indicate possible after effects of a brain injury. So things like learning disability, developmental delays, behavioral issues, mental health challenges, alcohol or drug misuse, or having court actions, all of these could be some of the downstream effects of having had a brain injury. Next slide, please. We would also recommend placing a key on the intake form explaining those symbols, where the single asterisk indicates an incident where a brain injury may have occurred, but the double asterisk indicates a possible downstream effect of a brain injury. You could also add a note stating that further brain injury screening, evaluation, education, treatment, or other accommodations may be necessary. So you can check out the temporary alternate screening approach document in our best practices supporting materials for more information about that. Keep in mind that the preferred approach is to have state child welfare systems adopt a formal brain injury screening tool and a symptom tool, and to screen all children and caregivers. It doesn't work if you just screen the ones you think might have been affected. You have to screen everybody. It's the definition of screening. Okay, so next slide, please. So remember, identifying the injury as soon as possible when people enter your system allows for intervention and lifelong monitoring to prevent undue stress and struggle, as well as to prevent the downstream consequences that frequently follow a brain injury. In case of a parent or older child who has received an injury years earlier, co-occurring problems should be screened for so that appropriate interventions and referrals can be recommended for those concerns as well as the brain injury itself. So these common downstream problems that screening and intervention seek to prevent include domestic violence, homelessness or housing instability, pain, substance misuse, mental health issues, including increased risk of suicide, and juvenile and criminal justice issues. Next slide. Now, once you've established the possibility of a lifetime event that could have caused a brain injury, you may want to move on to the next higher level of investigation, which is called neurocognitive screening. And this is a way to understand the effect of that brain injury that was established through screening and how the person's ongoing cognitive impairments, as well as what their cognitive strengths may be, that could affect their functioning and play a role in their child welfare involvement. So neurocognitive screenings are brief, objective, performance-based techniques that can give you additional information about how a person's functioning cognitively and can suggest potential further areas for strategy development, and can be also the basis for referring for a more comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. The neurocognitive screening is a good approach to use when child welfare personnel need more in-depth understanding of what cognitive impairments a person may be experiencing. And once these are identified, then you can target specific interventions to them. And it can also be important to understand the impairments because having certain brain injury impairments may open up specific resources in some states. So how do you do this? There's a variety of batteries that can be employed. Usually this is done by psychologists, but can also be done by school psychologists, social workers with proper training. And there's the Colorado Department of Education has developed a comprehensive matrix-based system that utilizes what we call the building blocks of brain injury. And this matrix can be used as a guide to determine certain assessments that might be done. If we can look at, if we can put the co-kids with brain injury in the chat so people can see that there's a link that will get you to the Colorado Kids building blocks, which gives you the whole matrix of which tests to use for memory, which tests to use for executive functioning, and so forth. Also on the screen is a link to a course that was developed in collaboration with NASHA and Dr. Kim Gorgans at the University of Denver to develop an on-demand online course to train community-based mental health providers how to conduct this neuropsych screening. So it's a 3-hour, 3-part course designed for master's level clinicians who are interested in learning about how to use these types of neurocognitive screening. And it can be taken by community providers, behavioral health workers, social workers, vocational rehab counselors, community rehabilitation providers, and addictions professionals. So that's the link that's on the screen right now. Next slide, please. So one of the main reasons to screen for history of brain injury and impairment is to guide targeted interventions so that you can improve outcomes for children and parents and caregivers in the child welfare system. And one way to do that is using resource facilitation. Resource facilitation is designed to help people with brain injury get the right kind of brain injury services and supports. So it's a kind of a specialized care management that assists people in applying for the services that they need, but also making sure they have the resource systems to pay for those services so they can actually get them. And this approach has been shown to increase both community participation and employment among individuals with brain injury. Also, the research in our offender populations is giving us preliminary evidence that identifying the brain injury and then connecting the individuals using resource facilitation to resources they might never have had access to prior to this, that this can result in a decreased recidivism and increased productive activity, including employment, education, volunteerism, and so forth. Next slide, please. So incorporating resource facilitation into your protocols is really ideal. Some states may not have a very robust system of resource facilitation. They may provide information and resource support, but that can be helpful as well. But it is recognized that every state not every state has one of these kinds of models in place. And if that's the case, we encourage you to work with state brain injury programs like the Brain Injury Association of America or BIA USA to work with the child welfare system to ensure that parents and caregivers and children with brain injury do get access to the specialized help that could help them improve their functioning in home and work and school. So it would be ideal for child welfare systems to designate personnel within their system to become their sort of brain injury resource facilitation experts. And they could get training in that. It's available through the BIAA Academy for Certification of Brain Injury Specialists. There's 2 courses there, a Brain Injury Fundamentals course or Certified Brain Injury Specialists, which would set them apart within your organizations as specialists in brain injury. More information about these training programs for brain injury is available at acbis.pro. We'll put that in the chat as well. Next slide, please. Now I think Wendy Elmo is going to talk with us about how to modify child welfare programming to accommodate for cognitive impairments. Wendy?
Thank you, Drew. I'm Wendy Elmo. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long blonde hair and a blue background with the BrainLinks logo on it. So the accommodations that we set up for people need to be feasible for the setting that they're going to be in, for home, school, work. They need to be contextually relevant, easy to use. And then child welfare workers need to be trained in these accommodations and how to adapt their expectations for people within their programs, for how to use those, how to change maybe how a group operates or handouts that may need to be used, how they're going to adapt things, and then how to identify what strategy to use and how to teach people to successfully use strategies. Next slide. So during this section, I'm going to be talking a lot about the tools that are in the supporting materials. So in terms of strategy and accommodation, Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center has a lot of videos and fact sheets. Those are included. There is a booklet from Ohio Valley Center for Brain Injury Prevention and Rehabilitation on accommodations that's included, as well as a training program. And the Rehab Hospital of Indiana has an extensive catalog of fact sheets that can also be used for strategies and accommodations. Next slide. These are 2 tools developed by BrainLinks. The Brainstorming Solutions tool is kind of like a template of what a cognitive therapist would have in their minds. And so we developed this tool to be used for people who don't have that background, who may be working in homes or case management, and it goes through different areas of cognition and sensation and behavior. And it has fill-in areas where you can adapt it to that person that you're working with, and then an accompanying strategies and accommodations tool. Next slide. There are a lot of school-specific resources that are in the supporting materials from the CDC. There are tools for teachers, for school nurses, for coaches, and for athletes. The Center for Brain Injury Research and Training has a lot of good tools as well. So we've tried to include kind of just the most important things that you might need, although we know that there are lots of other tools out there for all of these areas. But the 504 IEP accommodations and modifications is really great at showing what some general accommodations are for the classroom, and then also specific to what the impairment area is. I love that tool. And then the sample IEP goals from CBERT is focused on the strategy, which is kind of a paradigm shift for a lot of people, that when you're working with brain injury, you really want to focus on the strategy or this accommodation that's going to help you to meet that goal. Next slide. From BrainLinks, some school tools that you can use. There's Symptom Tracker, a hospital to school transition protocol. And this was developed because hospital Rehab personnel don't necessarily understand what happens in the school system. Some do, some don't. So it's to help facilitate that transition and that communication. And there's also a toolkit for school nurses. Colorado has that building blocks of brain development that Drew talked about, that I love as a visual for teachers to show that that once you take out one block, like let's say attention, the whole thing can fall down. And you see impacts in other things like reasoning and organization. The Get Schooled on Concussion symptom wheel is there as well, great tool. Next slide. And then some MindSource resources are there as well. And the screening where you can, for both adults and for juveniles, with customized tool sheets. So whatever they report having an issue with, you can then come up with a tip sheet for them. Next slide. So we have, and you can click through to the green check. So we have just talked about the components of a brain injury screening and identification. And now I'll talk about training and education for child welfare personnel. Next slide. So training can be a standalone thing that you go in and you offer, you do. In Tennessee, that's how we were able to get into our child welfare services. A lot of places, and if you work in brain injury, you know that when you talk with lots of different types of groups, they often don't understand how big a problem or an issue that brain injury is within the population that they're serving. So you may just be able to get in the door by doing training first. That way they can begin to understand the depth of the problem and how more of a protocol is needed. So you can start that way, but really we want the entire protocol to be a part of things if possible. We found that most child welfare personnel have had little brain injury training. The training should be the first part of the protocol, and you should try to get your trainings recorded and put into whatever existing training structures they have. So if there are things that new employees can access for their new training, then we would want it to be a part of that if possible. Include all personnel, including juvenile justice, if juvenile justice is a part of your system. We suggest 3 levels of training. One is just a broad-based training on brain injury for all child welfare personnel, and then deeper for those involved with implementing the protocol, and then deeper still for train the trainer. Next slide. We have linked many trainings within the supporting materials, supporting materials from lots of different groups that you can see there. And then on the next slide is some of the topics that are there. So geared toward foster parents, what they need to know about concussion, as well as to child welfare employees, traumatic brain injury, impairments and strategies, substance abuse. We have the course that Drew talked about for CBIS, the Certified Brain Injury Specialist, behavior, executive functioning, memory, depression, and relationships. And next slide. We also need to follow up. If we find that a parent has had a history of a brain injury, we need to educate them. And sometimes it can be really life-changing to find out that they've had a brain injury and to understand that that might be responsible for what's making them be different and feel different and maybe not be able to parent in the way that they would like to. It's not an excuse, it's a reason why things have happened the way that they have. So it's really important, and we need to convey to them that it doesn't mean that they can't parent effectively, that we have lots of strategies and resources to be able to help them to parent. And these include things like tip sheets and guides and booklets, parenting groups, state resources, social media supports, referral options, and supports for their children. And they're all included within the supporting materials. And next slide. So educational materials, when they're provided, should be written at the lowest grade level possible in Spanish and English, and individualized as much as possible. And we need tools that educate child welfare personnel, as well as the parent with the brain injury and the parents of children with a brain injury, because they're all different. Next slide. So we have signs and symptoms handout. So even though this is not necessarily someone is injured right now, they've been injured in the past, we might give them a signs and symptoms tool so that we can say, hey, there was an injury, but was there any, were there any symptoms from that? And these checklists can help give us an idea of that. And just a special note, that purpley one there is for people who communicate without words. How do you identify concussion in that group? There's also the CDC's checklist for school nurses, and there's one for student athletes. Next slide. We also have a number of guides included. The REAP guide is there. Get Schooled on Concussions, including the TACT is mentioned. There are a couple of guides that talk about what to look for when concussion symptoms have resolved, should have resolved, but have not. So we find a lot of people that are out in the community, maybe even knowing that they had a concussion and not feeling like they are themselves and things are off and maybe can't go back to their job, but don't understand why. And that's a good tool for that. We also know that when people have been through some sort of treatment, whether it's the hospital or cognitive rehabilitation, surgery, that they can still have problems. So we have a couple of guides that cover what are you going to be looking for over that person's lifetime. And then the personal guide for everyday living after concussion or traumatic brain injury gives typical cognitive challenges that people experience. It can be personalized to that person and what they're experiencing. Next slide. Many fact sheets and tools are included, 6 types of concussion infographic, concussion and brain injury alert monitor and monitoring form. I want to talk about that one in a second. We often, even when someone is identified with having had a brain injury, a child, they are often kind of lost over time. That information is lost over time. So this is a good form to be putting inside the child welfare case management file. So if the case management switches to another person, someone can still find that. It's really easy to fill out. And it can also go into the school nurses chart and also into the academic chart. The brainstorming solutions tool I talked about and strategies and accommodations tool. There are 2 tools for mental health included, a fact sheet for parents, information on opioids, and then also some great fact sheets from model systems. Next slide. We also include some information on social media support. Obviously, check with your state to see what's available there. On Facebook, there's a great group that was developed by, is led by people who have had injuries, traumatic or acquired brain injury support group. It's a private group, but they'll let you in. And in my experience, anytime I check into it, it's incredibly supportive. Next slide. Support for when the parent has had a brain injury. Parenting after a brain injury, there's a booklet. Parenting a second time around, the PASTA groups. The Association for Successful Parenting is dedicated to enhancing the well-being of at-risk parents with learning difficulties in their children. And there's also a great article in there from North Carolina. Next slide. When the parent has an injury, there's also several articles that we have included. Connecticut Parents with Different Cognitive Abilities Work Group. The Job Accommodations Network has a lot of great information for returning to work. The Concussions Discussions website has a great interview series. Brainline is a great resource, and then the desk reference for supporting parents with disabilities for child welfare professionals. And next slide. When the child has had, supporting the child with an injured parent, there's again, there's a good booklet, there's a good article, and there's a nice blog in there, so you can help with that. Supporting the child. Next slide. And then in terms of referral, we always want to be able to give people a referral to someone specific in the community if we can do that, if we have that. So we want to develop, wherever you are, develop those specific referrals. Short of that, though, we want to be referring someone to a symptom-specific specialist. And all of these documents here have that kind of that sense of who to refer to for what built into them. So if we jump down to the bottom two, a guide to possible changes after brain injury for school-age children and adults, and the next one for young children, those have charts in them that say, okay, here's this symptom that this child or this adult is experiencing, and here's who you might go to for it. So it's not giving a name, but it's giving you who you're going to look for. We found in Tennessee that in some places in the state, neurologists aren't accepting what they're calling kind of like, just a simple concussion. We know that it's not always as simple as that, and that's not always the best place to go. If it's a vision issue, you might go to a neuro-ophthalmologist or others. So we'll try to give some specific places that people can go. And next slide. All right, now I am going to hand off to Kelly. We've talked about training and education, and now Kelly's going to talk about data collection and outcomes evaluation. Thank you.
All right, next slide. So data collection and outcome evaluation. Really, in order to support implementation and sustainability of brain injury protocols within the child welfare system, brain injury programs might need to explore ways of demonstrating the benefits. And a way to do that would be to develop data collection protocols and research methodologies to demonstrate effectiveness and an improvement in outcomes for families. Next slide. So what could be some potential outcomes to look at and explore? Of course, best case scenario would be to discover these through conversations with your child welfare partners, but looking at things like success with treatment, success with any sort of conditions that are included in a family's treatment or service plan, or conditions that might be imposed by the court, or maybe a reduction in out-of-home placement or reduction in the length of out-of-home placement. Next slide. So how in the world would you start to do this? Well, sometimes an easy first step is if you have a partnership with a university, or if you can reach out to a university and begin a partnership around some research and data collection. Talking with your child welfare partners around what data do they already collect, or what, of course, would be beneficial for them to start collecting. And there are some federal requirements and state requirements as well around what data is tracked by child welfare in order to measure outcomes and success, and sort of look at who they're serving and how successful they are. Next slide. And so here are some more examples of potential data to look at. Again, some of these are likely already collected by child welfare and are required to be collected, like demographic data, number of out-of-home placement, length of stay in out-of-home placement. So some of these things may already exist, and it could just be a matter of building upon what is already there. Next slide. And next, we will be turning it back to June, who will talk about sustainability and funding strategies.
Thank you so much, Kelly. You guys all did such a great job that I realized I didn't take the time to describe myself the first time around. So I'll take that opportunity now. My name is June, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman with dark hair pulled back, wearing a black and white shirt. Next slide, please. So in this section, we are very briefly going to address sustainability and funding. As you've heard throughout this presentation with my colleagues, we're encouraging you to turn attention to the guide and to the supporting materials and tools to support the efforts and build the knowledge within your own state on this topic. Next slide. Sustainability and funding relies on being able to evaluate the landscape within your state to determine if you're able to establish effective partnerships within the child welfare system. Your lead state agency, brain injury advocacy organization, among other partners, may be included. The child welfare engagement model that we briefly reviewed earlier should give you an excellent starting point to do a scan in your state of possible partners. Next slide, please. As you find possible partners and champions within your systems, you likely will need to spend some time sharing data points about intersections with brain injury and the value of brain injury informed services and programs within the child welfare system. You will likely need to advocate for the building of brain injury informed programming and protocols within the child welfare system. Be strong in knowing that you have the same goal in keeping families together, keeping them safe and healthy. You will want to spend some time potentially formalizing partnerships as you establish those, thinking about establishing scopes of work, which may even involve a formal MOU or a memorandum of understanding. There is a sample of an MOU that we use right here in Iowa within your supporting materials and in the guide. Next slide, please. In the process of evaluating and taking a scan of the landscape in your state and establishing those partnerships, there is going to be value in establishing which data points your collaborative effort wishes to evaluate with the goal to use that data to produce a body of evidence to refine your work and provide you the opportunity to seek additional partners and funding opportunities to sustain that work. I will share here in Iowa, we have the opportunity to work closely with NASHA's leading practice academy that included program evaluators to help us determine how to launch a pilot with predetermined and meaningful data points that were identified. Next slide. And here we're going to land on the last component of our webinar today. We're going to talk about key takeaways and references. So next slide, please. Here you will find what we hope are the key takeaways or some of the key takeaways from our presentation. The guide and the supplementary tools. State child welfare systems can be incredibly complex, as is brain injury. However, the common thread you will find is a system that is working to navigate for the best interest of their clients, children, and families. This guide will support your efforts to find that common ground and introduce the practices of brain injury screening, training, the introduction of considering addressing brain injury symptomology as a component of service delivery within the child welfare system. Next slide. From here, this group of presenters, which is frankly a sample of really great minds that spent a number of hours pulling this guide together for your use. We plan to continue our work to seek out opportunities to highlight this guide through social media, articles, presentations like this one, and seek additional marketing opportunities. We invite you as attendees today to consider where you might share this information, where you might share this guide within your platforms and your states. And I'm excited as we kind of round out today's presentation to be able to turn to the questions that you all have. Next slide, please. I will note, we've mentioned, I think, a few times that there are links in the chat. There's going to be links in the PDF of the slide deck. Here on this slide, I encourage go ahead and everybody pull out your phones, grab this QR code. This is an opportunity for you to access the guide among other materials on the NASHA website. I would have to say, if you're not familiar with NASHA, or if you're not familiar with, depending on what brings you here today, and I know there was a variety of folks that signed on, if you're not familiar with NASHA or your state brain injury advocacy organizations, alliance, or association, I do really encourage you to take some time to learn about those resources that are available to you in your state. Next slide, please. I think actually the next couple slides here, we have some references for your consideration. You'll note, again, the chat has been chock full of these links, and rest assured you have those in the slide deck as well. Next slide. And I think this gives us an opportunity to turn it back over to our hosts for questions. So looking forward to the conversation and the next opportunities. Thank you. Next slide, or maybe stay here for questions.
So well done, all of you. So much information chalked into just really a few minutes of presentation time. We so appreciate you guys sharing all the work that you've done, all the resources that you've linked people to, and there are a slew of questions, and I'm just going to read through some of these and maybe invite all of you to pop back on camera, and we can see who maybe wants to answer each one of these, if you would. Drew, I'm going to start with this one because I have a feeling it might be directed towards something you can answer for everyone, if that's all right. If a child was lead poisoned in daycare and now he has autism, nonverbal, and has been diagnosed with pica, is that also TBI?
So, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that there can be so many things that can affect, especially a child throughout their development. And certainly lead poisoning, prolonged exposure to lead can cause permanent brain damage. And how that manifests itself, how it shows up in the child's life, could be any number of things. I mean, so it doesn't surprise me that the child ends up with a diagnosis of autism. Autism is a disorder of the brain. I think about our work with adults too. One thing we learned from working in the prisons is by screening adults for lifetime history of brain injury, we discovered that 75% of the adults coming out of prison have evidence of a lifetime history of brain injury. And another 75% of them, their brain injury occurred before the age of 21. And so, what we're looking at are sometimes very subtle forms of injury to the brain that go undetected and can pop up as many different things. They could pop up. I saw a question about personality disorder. I saw about mental health disorders. They can show up in these other systems. And that's why we advocate for early screening as soon as you have the chance to screen for a lifetime event of brain injury.
Great, well said, and some really excellent points. And I apologize, I also forgot to introduce myself and describe myself. I'm Maria Crowley with the Traumatic Brain Injury Technical Assistance and Resource Center. I have silver hair and I have a purple and white shirt and a blurred background. So next question for all of you. Are there any standard guidelines of these investigations, and how is the investigator trained for brain injury? And you've touched on that. Does anybody want to specifically address that?
I would just take a stab at the first level of screening, that like using the Ohio State University TBI ID or HELPS method. Any of us on this call could be trained to do those types of screening. The training is available online, and it's not so hard to learn how to apply these instruments in the standardized way. The next level that I described in my section of neurocognitive assessment, that's a little more involved and requires more training. But I guarantee you anyone on the call could learn to do the first level screening.
Maria, I
Yes.
just wanted to build on what Drew said. I think, one of the things that we've learned and we know is that it's safe to assume that, when you're screening, that there may be a history of trauma. We're certainly all familiar with, trauma-informed care and adverse childhood experiences. And so screening can, become triggering. And so as you do that, consider that. a factor, and obviously having a trusting relationship with the individual is important. So screening someone right off the bat may not be advised, unless you've got a good relationship with them.
Great point, Jim. Great point. Two things I want to point out to you, because there's some questions in the chat about these. Are the links will be available within the PowerPoint. You have them in the chat, and you can download the chat and save those right now as we're talking. And the slides and the recording will all be archived and available for you later on today. I see Terry's also posted the PDF of the slides in the chat as well. Thank you. Okay, here's another question. Where may we go to view the current TBI assessment within our state?
I'm not quite sure if this is what the questioner is getting at, but I mean, every state should have a lead state agency on brain injury, and for states that receive federal funding through the Administration on Community Living, they should have a traumatic brain injury advisory board, and that's a good place to go to start learning what level of assessment is available in your state. And as I think others pointed out, also going to your Brain Injury Association or Brain Injury Alliance is a good way to find out what sort of the state of brain injury investigation is in your state.
Great point. Does anybody want to add anything to that? You guys have a wealth of resources in your states, but as Drew's mentioned, there are some resources in many other states as well. It looks like Judy has started an answer for one of the last questions that was in the chat about brief screening, and if you would reach out to her about that question. At a population level, what is the estimated rate of occurrence for TBI among parents involved with a child welfare system?
I can't say that there's any specific data that I'm aware of, other than to, just go back to think about the frequent issues that you work on in that system, the mental health, the substance use, intimate partner violence, and then look at the prevalence rate of those issues as compared to the general population, like Drew had mentioned. Over 75% of incarcerated individuals have a lifetime history of brain injury. So we know in those populations that are in the child welfare system, well over 50%, incidence of brain injury. So the likelihood is you're working with folks who have had at least one brain injury. I think a key takeaway, and Drew had referenced Dr. Gorgans in one of the neurocognitive pieces. She likes to say, you can't find it if you're not looking for it. And so the important thing is, are you looking for it? And if you're not, it's probably time to start looking for it.
Definitely well said. I see a couple of other resources in the chat. One is specific to advocacy organizations, both alliances and associations across states. And the other is a list of state brain injury programs in the directory there. So if you don't know what your state resource is, you can look at both of those and find it.
Yeah, I'll just say one other thing. I can't remember who referenced this, but the importance of having an evaluator on your project. In our pilot project in Iowa, we've been fortunate to partner with the University of Iowa. And those are one of the data points that we're collecting. So as we move through our pilot, we'll know the percentage of individuals that we're working with who do have a lifetime history of brain injury.
And I would encourage other states to also be collecting that information, because we know about how brain injury intersects, like Jim said, with a lot of different other populations, but not so much with this one. So if everybody could be, reporting on and sharing their data, that would be awesome.
That would be awesome. This is a longer situation that leads to a question. And Drew, you touched on this, but I'm just going to read through it so we make sure we've hit the mark with answering this one. I have a parent whose kids have been taken away. We have had a difficult time getting traction towards reunification because of the TBI and emotional dysregulation. Also, there are struggles with PTSD and anxiety. There have been many triggers for this individual, and he can appear scary. He's not once laid a hand on anyone. We have and are filing ADA motions, and he is connected to services. I'm sure some of his outbursts are because he's scared and angry, but also some of his situation is exacerbated by his TBI. So here's the question. He was not as emotionally dysregulated 2 years ago as he is now. Is that a common occurrence of TBI? Does that make sense? Any feedback would be appreciated. That's a long one, but.
Yeah. Well, let me try to address the tail end of it at least. I mean, when we're talking about traumatic brain injury, and we're often talking about injury to the frontal lobe and the underside of the frontal lobe, which is deeply connected to the limbic system. And that's the area of the brain that really regulates behavior and emotion. And so it's not uncommon in TBI, especially frontal injury, to have dysregulated behavior, disinhibition, this is in fact what gets a lot of people into trouble with the law, is they don't think before they act, or they don't think before they say something. And so it certainly, your observations of this person would definitely warrant screening and possibly further assessment for brain injury.
Thank you. It's not often easy to tweeze some of those things out, is it?
Not at all.
I see some more resources listed in the chat. I have a question I'd like to pose to all of you. What are some lessons learned in developing this resource? And what do you envision as the next steps for this field? What direction do you think we need to go?
I would just really encourage anybody who's in child welfare on this call to bring it to the attention of your state leaders so that they can see how important it could be to incorporate this into your existing system. There's the potential for the entire system to benefit by having your interventions be a lot more successful if you understand that people have cognitive impairment, and you can then give them strategies. A simple example is in therapy. How do people benefit from psychotherapy? Well, they have to be able to understand what is going on in the therapy. They have to apply it to themselves. They have to be able to remember that which you talk about with your therapist when you come back the next time. And you have to be able to remember something you intend to do differently in the future. All of these things are hard for people with brain injury. But with strategies, they can make better use of the therapy. And that's really what we would encourage. The reason we would encourage you to do this is to get better outcomes in the work that you do.
Maria, I think I would add, the child welfare system is so incredibly complex. There are so many moving players and components at different stages, whether that be within the reporting process, assessment, investigation, and so on, let alone the services and the engagement that can take place while, the CPS workers or child welfare program is engaging with a family. You have that complexity, and then you also have the complexity of understanding brain injury. There are so many opportunities to engage in at different intersections or experiences. I think that there's a lot of work to be done in helping reduce stigma around brain injury, helping understand brain injury symptomology and what that looks like and how that intersects with life for many folks. And like, I would just reiterate what Drew said and second that we're looking for outcomes for families to be safe, healthy, to reduce trauma for families and children. And so when we can create systems that are brain injury informed, I think we have that common ground with the child welfare system.
Definitely. Anything, Kelly, you or Jim or Wendy, you want to add to that?
Well, one thing to consider, I know having worked in child welfare is sometimes when something new comes along, it feels like, oh my gosh, how would we implement this? How do we do this? We already do so much. And so I would encourage people to just think broadly about how you could incorporate brain injury screening into your practice. It might not have to be that caseworkers learn how to do a screening. It could be you ask your local CASA program if they could get trained to do screens. It could be that you start asking for when kids go in for a well exam, that the physician or the nurse or a physician's assistant do a brain injury screen. So it doesn't have to land flat on the desk of the caseworker who is managing a million different moving pieces. There could be ways to incorporate this into practice that don't necessarily feel like a huge lift. And even if people are interested in this, just trying to maybe pilot it with one team in your agency, or one lead worker who decides to take it on and pilot it with their caseload and see how it goes. I think, there are ways to climb this mountain. If you're interested, there are ways to take it one step at a time. And I think it's incredibly valuable information, having been in child welfare and juvenile justice. And now I'm in the brain injury side of things. It's just this light bulb moment of why is this piece so often overlooked? Oh my goodness, it's really valuable information. And there are a lot of resources. So there's just a lot of tools and supports available.
Definitely. This panel of subject matter experts have made it much easier for you to have resources at your fingertips. Is there a correlation between fetal alcohol syndrome disorder and brain injury and brain injuries involved in the TPR rates?
I'll just clarify that fetal alcohol syndrome technically is not an acquired brain injury because it happens before birth, and our definition generally refers to something that happens to the brain after the child is born and there's some period of normal brain function. But that being said, the problems that children and later on adults with fetal alcohol syndrome have are very much similar to those of people with traumatic brain injury. And so it is a population of people that could be helped with similar strategies. If we put aside the sort of the formal barriers or definitions, I used to work at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where we had a formal screening program for fetal alcohol syndrome disorders, of which there are more than 300. So I think there are several places around the country that do this, and it's very important to identify that disability as well, because it can result in cognitive impairment, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, great point. Last question for you, and I could venture a guess, but I'm gonna let you answer it. Is there a correlation between cell phone screen time usage and TBI?
Were you talking to me, Maria?
Any of
Or
you.
Any of you. I am not aware of that, but see if my colleagues know of something.
I think of it kind of along the lines of ACEs, where it's not brain injury, but it's brain development differences. And I know that they're seeing with screen time in the very young, they're seeing language development issues. And I think I read something recently about math. So we wouldn't consider that, a brain injury, but I think a change to the development of the brain.
I would say that there probably is some co-occurrence if you have screen time usage while you're, say, driving.
Yeah.
For sure. That is all the time we have for questions. And I want to say thank you again to all of you. What an amazing presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Terry with some final poll questions.
Thank you, everyone. This was an amazing presentation. I learned so much. Vivian, can you put the slides back up, please? Thank you. All right, so before everyone goes, we have some evaluation questions for the group. So if you could please take the time to respond to these 6 evaluation questions, they really help us to deliver high quality TBI TARC webinars. Also, if you have any suggestions of how we can improve these webinars, or if you have an idea or request for future topics, please send us a note. And the email address is tbitarc@hsri.org. I'm seeing some people have started responding. It really helps us, just to get your feedback about how we're doing, and we can use this information to improve future webinars. So thank you. Please do take the time to respond to the questions before you log off. I see people are logging off. It's almost the top of the hour. And what is the next slide? Oops. And these are the questions we want you to rate the quality of the webinar, whether the webinar met your expectation, whether you thought it was too long, too short, or about the right time, length of time, how you think you're going to use this. Are you likely to use the information in your work or day-to-day activities, and how likely you are to share the recording, which, as Shaska noted, you will get a link from Zoom, but in a few weeks, we will upload it to the ACL website, and that one will have the captions. It'll be edited a little so that you can be able to see the recording in their YouTube channel, and then you'll also have the link to the slides. And finally, how can we improve future webinars? As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. At the Evaluation Center. Thank you so much, everyone that responded, that is here. And at the end of the webinar, of the slide deck, you'll see the bios for all the participants, and you'll also see their contact information. And again, please reach out to us at the TBI Resource Center if you have any questions and if we can assist in any way. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you all soon in the near future. We will be having a webinar in September, and look out for some information about that webinar that we'll be sharing again soon. Thank you and have a good day.